The ballroom erupted in applause. My two sons stood beside a giant projector screen, smiling like men who had already won. My daughter sat near the front table, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Then my oldest son, Daniel, raised a legal document and cleared his throat. "We've reached a difficult decision," he announced. The room fell silent. For the future of the company, our father needs to step down permanently. A photograph of me appeared on the screen behind him. Underneath it were 3 words: mentally unfit to lead. Investors exchanged glances. Managers whispered. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And my own children stood there waiting for me to surrender the company I had spent 40 years building. What none of them knew was that I had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 68 years old. 42 years ago, I started Hayes Industrial Supply from a rented garage with 1 delivery truck, 2 employees, and a second mortgage on my house. Back then, I worked 18-hour days. I loaded trucks before sunrise, delivered orders myself, handled invoices at night. My wife, Carol, kept the books at our kitchen table while raising our 3 children. There were years when we barely slept. Years when payroll came before groceries. Years when every dollar mattered. But somehow we survived. Then we grew. 1 warehouse became 3. 3 became 7. Customers became contracts. Contracts became a business worth more money than I ever imagined possible. The entire time I believed I was building something for my family. Not just wealth, a legacy, a future, a reason for my children to stay connected long after I was gone. When Daniel graduated college, I gave him a management position. When my younger son Kevin finished business school, I brought him into operations. My daughter Emily joined the finance department a few years later. I was proud of that, maybe too proud. I loved walking through headquarters and seeing my children helping run the company. Employees respected them. Clients knew them. I thought everything was exactly as it should be. Then Carol died. Cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. 39 years of marriage gone in less than a year. After she passed away, something changed. Not all at once. Slowly. So slowly, I almost missed it. Family dinners became less frequent. Phone calls became shorter. Weekends became busier. Everyone always had somewhere else to be. I told myself that was normal. They had families, responsibilities, lives of their own. But sometimes I'd sit alone in my house and realize nobody had called all week. The company became the only place I regularly saw my children. Even there, things started feeling different. One Monday morning, I walked into the executive conference room for our weekly leadership meeting. The room was empty. I checked my watch. I wasn't late. I checked my calendar. The meeting was still scheduled. A few minutes later, I found Daniel in his office. "Did everyone forget the meeting?" I asked. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Oh, we moved it." "We?" "The executive team." "When?" "Last week." Nobody had told me. I laughed awkwardly, thought it was an oversight. But then it happened again. And again. Important discussions occurred without me. Decisions were announced instead of discussed. Projects moved forward before I even heard about them. Whenever I asked questions, I got the same answer. "Don't worry, Dad, we've got it handled." At first it sounded reassuring. Later it sounded dismissive. One afternoon I suggested expanding into a neighboring state. The idea had worked well for us in the past. Daniel smiled politely. That's probably how business worked 20 years ago. Several managers laughed. Not loudly, just enough. I sat there looking around the table. Nobody challenged him. Nobody looked uncomfortable. They simply moved on. As if I hadn't spoken. That was the first time I felt old. Not because of my age. Because of the way my own son looked at me. Months passed. The behavior became more obvious. Managers who used to report directly to me started going through Daniel and Kevin instead. Major clients called my children first. Internal memos arrived after decisions were already finalized. Then the retirement comments started. At first they sounded harmless. Dad deserves a break. You've earned retirement. You should enjoy life. But eventually those comments became recommendations, then expectations. One evening after work, Emily stopped by my office. She sat across from me and folded her hands. Dad, have you ever thought about stepping back? I smiled. Not seriously. She didn't smile back. Maybe it's time. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. Not concern, not love. Pressure. For the first time, I began wondering if they still saw me as their father, or if they were starting to see me as something else, something standing in their way. And unfortunately, I was about to get my answer. The answer came 6 months later. And it arrived in the form of a minor heart procedure. Nothing life-threatening, just a blockage that required a stent and a few weeks of recovery. The doctors told me I'd be back to normal within a month. I wasn't worried. The company had survived bigger problems than me being away for a few weeks. Besides, my children were running most of the day-to-day operations anyway. I actually felt proud leaving the office that afternoon. Proud that I had raised capable successors. Proud that the business could function without me. I remember shaking Daniel's hand before leaving. Keep things moving. He smiled. Don't worry about a thing, Dad. Looking back, those words mean something very different now. The surgery went well. The recovery was uncomfortable but manageable. The first week I mostly stayed home, read books, watched old movies, answered a few emails, but by the second week something felt strange. Too quiet. No calls from the office, no questions, no updates, no one asking for advice. At first I told myself they were simply respecting my recovery. Then I started calling. Daniel rarely answered. Kevin always sounded busy. Emily usually texted back hours later. Everything okay? Yep. Anything important happening? Nothing major. Don't stress about work. Rest. The conversations lasted less than 2 minutes. One afternoon I received an email from a longtime supplier. The subject line caught my attention immediately. Congratulations on the transition. Transition? I opened it. The supplier was thanking me for supporting the company's leadership succession process. I stared at the screen. Leadership succession process? Nobody had discussed a succession process with me. I called Daniel immediately, straight to voicemail. I called Kevin. No answer. Emily finally picked up. What's this succession process? I asked. There was silence. Not long, just long enough. Then she sighed. Dad, we're exploring options. Options for what? The future. The future of what? The company. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. Without talking to me? Dad, don't make this into something bigger than it is. Those words stayed with me. Don't make this into something bigger. I built the company. Owned the majority shares, signed every major contract for 4 decades, and somehow I was being treated like an outsider asking unnecessary questions. A week later, I returned to headquarters. The moment I walked through the doors, something felt wrong. Not visibly wrong, emotionally wrong. People seemed nervous. Conversations stopped when I approached. Managers avoided eye contact. Several employees looked surprised to see me, as if they weren't expecting me back. I walked into the executive conference room. The leadership team was already seated. Daniel stood near the screen giving a presentation. He froze when he saw me. Didn't know this meeting was happening, I said calmly. Nobody spoke. Then Kevin pulled out a chair. You can sit in if you want. Sit in, like a guest, like an observer. Not the founder, not the CEO, not the man who built the entire business. I sat quietly through the meeting, and for the first time in company history, nobody asked for my opinion, not once. Every decision had already been made. Every discussion already settled. When the meeting ended, people filed out quickly. Daniel stayed behind. I closed the door. We need to talk. His shoulders stiffened. About what? About whatever the hell is happening. He sighed heavily, like I was exhausting him. Dad, things are changing. That's not an answer. You've been doing this a long time. So have you. His eyes narrowed. Maybe that's exactly the point. The room suddenly felt smaller. What does that mean? It means maybe you're too close to this company to know when it's time to step aside. I stared at him. My own son. The same boy who used to sit in my office drawing pictures while I worked late. The same boy whose college tuition I'd paid. The same boy I'd trusted with executive authority. And now he was talking to me like a problem to be managed. Not a father, not even a business partner. A problem. That conversation bothered me for weeks. Then things got worse. Far worse. One morning, Emily walked into my office carrying a folder. She sat down, opened it, and slid several papers across the desk. I looked down. Medical evaluations, cognitive assessments, neurological screenings. What is this? I asked. Her voice was carefully controlled. We think it would be good for everyone if you completed these. I looked up slowly. For everyone? She nodded. It's becoming a concern. What is? Your judgment. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, because they weren't. And she knew they weren't. I leaned back in my chair. Who is we? Emily hesitated, then answered. All of us. For a moment I couldn't speak. The room felt completely silent. Then I asked one question. Do you honestly believe I have cognitive problems? She looked away. That was answer enough, because she couldn't even say yes. She just needed me to believe she did. That night I sat alone in my office long after everyone left. The building was dark, quiet. The same building I had dreamed about owning when I was 30 years old. I thought about my wife. Carol always noticed things before I did. She used to tell me that loyalty reveals itself during moments of inconvenience. Not moments of success, moments of inconvenience. And suddenly I realized something. My children weren't acting worried. They were acting strategic. The retirement comments. The exclusion. The meetings. The evaluations. The succession conversations. None of it was random. It was coordinated. For the first time I felt genuine fear. Not fear of losing the company. Fear that my own children had stopped seeing me as family. And if that was true, I needed to find out what they were really planning. A week later, that answer arrived in my inbox by mistake, and the moment I opened that email, everything changed. I stared at the email for nearly 10 minutes before reading it a second time, then a third, then a fourth. Every time, the words felt worse. The email had been sent by an outside corporate attorney. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Daniel, Kevin, Emily, and 2 board members. Someone had accidentally copied my private company email into the chain. The subject line read, Leadership Transition Strategy. I kept reading. There were pages of discussion, timelines, legal options, board votes, retirement scenarios, even plans for transferring voting authority. But one thing stood out. Not a single sentence asked what was best for me. Not one. Everything focused on removing me as quickly and efficiently as possible. Like I was a problem, an obstacle, a piece of old equipment standing in the way of progress. Then I reached the sentence that changed everything. If cognitive concerns can be sufficiently documented, shareholder control can potentially be transferred sooner than expected. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, every conversation made sense. The evaluations, the retirement pressure, the concern, the meetings. None of it had been concern. It had been preparation. That night, I stopped trying to understand my children. I stopped trying to fix the relationship. And I started protecting what I had built. The next morning, I called a forensic accounting firm, quietly, privately. No one inside the company knew. I wanted a complete review of executive spending, contracts, bonuses, consulting fees, and expense reports. 3 weeks later, the results arrived. I wish they hadn't. Unauthorized executive bonuses, personal travel charged to company accounts, consulting agreements awarded to friends, luxury expenses hidden inside operational budgets. Nothing catastrophic, but enough. Enough to prove abuse of authority. Enough to prove they weren't acting in the company's best interest. Enough to destroy every argument they planned to make against me. That wasn't the biggest surprise. The biggest surprise came when my attorney pulled out a file I hadn't looked at in years, a shareholder protection agreement. I remembered signing it nearly 15 years earlier. Back then, a business mentor had warned me about family companies. He told me something I never forgot. The first generation builds it. The second generation grows it. The third generation fights over it. Because of that conversation, I created strict succession requirements. Any family member seeking voting control had to meet leadership standards, fiduciary obligations, performance benchmarks, and board approval requirements. It wasn't automatic, it was earned. My children had forgotten that agreement existed. Unfortunately for them, I hadn't. The months passed quietly. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply waited. Then came the retirement celebration. The invitation claimed it was a surprise honoring my 42 years of leadership. Hundreds attended: employees, investors, vendors, board members, friends. The ballroom looked beautiful, too beautiful. The moment I walked inside, I knew something was wrong. Daniel greeted me with a smile that felt rehearsed. Kevin barely made eye contact. Emily seemed nervous, not emotional, nervous, like someone waiting for an explosion. Then dinner ended. The lights dimmed, and Daniel walked onto the stage. Exactly as I remembered. Exactly as you've already heard. The speech started respectfully, then gradually changed. Words like transition, responsibility, future, leadership. Finally, he held up the document. We've reached a difficult decision. The room became silent. Our father is no longer capable of leading this company. A giant image appeared behind him. Mentally unfit to lead gasps spread across the ballroom. I watched people turn toward me, waiting, watching, expecting anger, expecting shock, expecting resistance. Instead, I remained seated. Daniel continued speaking. Kevin stood beside him. Emily avoided looking at me. Then came the final request. A packet of legal documents was placed in front of me. All I had to do was sign, one signature, and they would take control. Daniel smiled. We only want what's best for you, Dad. That sentence almost made me laugh. I slowly stood. The room was completely silent. Then I looked toward the company attorney. Would you please distribute the other folders? Daniel's smile disappeared. Kevin frowned. The attorney immediately began handing out thick packets to every board member. People opened them, started reading. Then the whispers began. Fast. Confused. Concerned. One board member removed his glasses and stared at Daniel. Another flipped through pages faster and faster. Daniel looked nervous now. What's going on? He asked. Nobody answered, because they were reading. Audit findings, expense reports, unauthorized compensation, improper contracts, internal approvals, evidence documents, facts. Then they reached the final section, the shareholder protection agreement. The room changed. Completely. One board member looked directly at my children. None of you qualify. Silence. Absolute silence. Kevin looked confused. What does that mean? The attorney answered calmly. It means control of voting shares cannot legally transfer to any of you. Daniel's face turned pale. Emily finally looked up. For the first time all evening, none of them had prepared a response. Because they never expected resistance. They expected surrender. The emergency board meeting happened the next morning. It lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the outcome was unanimous. Executive authority suspended. Financial investigation opened. Access permissions revoked. Leadership review initiated. My children left the building furious, threatening lawsuits, threatening appeals, threatening everything they could think of. None of it mattered. The documents were airtight. A week later, they returned to headquarters expecting negotiations. Instead, security met them in the lobby. Their access cards no longer worked. Their executive credentials had been deactivated. Their offices were locked. Personal belongings had already been packed. I watched everything from the boardroom, not with satisfaction, not with anger, with clarity. The company was finally safe. Inside that same boardroom, I signed appointments for new leadership, not family. Professionals, people who had actually earned the responsibility. Then I finalized the trust structure protecting the company's future. Employees would benefit, future generations would benefit, but entitlement would not. As the meeting ended, I looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. My children were standing there arguing with security, demanding access, demanding control, demanding authority. The same authority they had tried to take from me, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace, because I finally understood something. A business can be inherited, a title can be inherited, even money can be inherited. But trust must be earned, and respect must be earned. My children lost both long before they lost the company.